Rebecca Carter had always dreamed of escaping the small town where she had spent her entire life, growing up in a modest home with her younger brother and a single mother who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. Rebecca knew struggle all too well. She spent most of her teenage years juggling school and shifts at the local diner, saving whatever she could in hopes of a better future. But opportunities were scarce, and her dreams of moving to a big city or going to college seemed farther away with each passing year. That was when she met Richard Holloway. He was a wealthy businessman, nearly 34 years older than her, who had made a fortune in real estate. Richard had been a regular at the diner, always sitting in the same booth, always ordering black coffee with just a hint of sugar. He was polite, generous with his tips, and carried himself with an air of confidence that set him apart from the other customers. At first, Rebecca saw him as just another diner regular, but over time their conversations became longer and his presence grew familiar. Richard showered her with compliments, always noticing the little things, the way she tied her apron, the way she laughed when she got flustered with too many orders. He made her feel special, like she was more than just a waitress stuck in a town with no future. Then, one evening, he invited her to dinner. It wasn't at a fancy restaurant, but at his own home, a grand estate on the outskirts of town, far from the small apartments and run-down houses she was used to. The house was enormous, with polished floors, high ceilings, and chandeliers that glittered in the dim lighting. It felt like something out of a movie, a world so far from her own that it hardly seemed real. Rebecca knew people would talk. The age difference was impossible to ignore, and Richard's reputation in town was somewhat of a mystery. No one knew much about his past, only that he had been married twice before, both wives having passed away under what people called unfortunate circumstances. But Rebecca didn't care about rumors. Richard made her feel wanted, protected, and most importantly, he offered her a life she never thought she could have. 6 months after they met, Richard proposed, slipping an expensive diamond ring onto her finger. Her mother was hesitant, her friends concerned, but Rebecca saw it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a chance to leave behind the long hours at the diner, the overdue bills, the suffocating small-town life. And so, despite the whispers and the judgmental glances, she married Richard in a quiet ceremony at his estate. For a brief moment it seemed like a fairy tale. The wedding was small but elegant, the reception filled with laughter and toasts to their future. But beneath the surface, an unease lingered. Rebecca's smile, though bright, didn't quite reach her eyes. She had secured a future, but at what cost? The discovery of Rebecca Holloway's body sent shockwaves through the quiet town. Just days after her wedding, she was found lifeless in the bedroom of her new home, the very mansion she had once admired for its grandeur. The details surrounding her death were disturbing, and the authorities wasted no time in launching an investigation. It was Richard Holloway who had made the grim discovery. He had been away on a business trip, returning late at night to an eerily silent house. As he climbed the grand staircase to their bedroom, he called Rebecca's name, expecting to find her asleep. But instead, he found her lying on the floor, motionless. Her skin was pale, her lips slightly parted, and her eyes frozen in an expression of shock. Her hands were clenched into tight fists, her nails digging into her palms as if she had fought against something unseen. Richard claimed he tried to revive her, but it was too late. Paramedics arrived shortly after his frantic 911 call, but there was nothing they could do. She was already gone. The cause of death was unclear at first. There were no signs of forced entry, no visible wounds, no blood, and nothing appeared to have been stolen. But something felt off. The room itself held clues, ones that would raise unsettling questions. On the nightstand beside the bed sat an untouched glass of wine, as if she had poured it for herself but never taken a sip. A pearl necklace, the same one she had worn at her wedding, lay on the floor, its string broken, scattering the pearls across the thick carpet. The house's state-of-the-art security system had been turned off hours before Rebecca's death, something that could not have happened accidentally. Detectives combed through the mansion, searching for anything that might explain what had happened. The master bathroom still had steam on the mirror, indicating someone had recently showered. A faint, strange smell lingered in the air, chemical-like, though subtle. The bed was made neatly, as if Rebecca had never climbed into it that night. Her phone was missing. This was perhaps the most puzzling detail of all. Rebecca had been known to keep her phone close at all times, yet it was nowhere to be found. The lack of a phone suggested that someone had taken it either before or after her death. This single fact shifted the focus of the case. What at first seemed like a tragic accident or a medical emergency now hinted at something far more sinister. As investigators questioned Richard, his grief appeared genuine, but his answers lacked clarity. He had been away for the past 2 days and insisted that Rebecca had been fine when they last spoke. But why had she turned off the security system? Why was her phone missing? And what was the significance of the broken pearl necklace? The case had only just begun, but one thing was already clear: Rebecca's death was no accident. As the investigation into Rebecca Holloway's death progressed, detectives began piecing together the final moments of her life. The toxicology report provided a breakthrough. Traces of a rare poison had been found in her system. It was slow-acting, meaning she had been exposed to it hours before her death. This revelation confirmed what investigators had already begun to suspect: Rebecca had been murdered. The focus immediately shifted to those closest to her. Richard Holloway, as her husband and the one who had discovered her body, was the primary person of interest. His wealth and influence meant he had resources that could either cover up a crime or lead investigators astray. His previous marriages, both ending in the untimely deaths of his wives, suddenly became critical points of inquiry. Detectives uncovered troubling details about Richard's past. His first wife, Margaret, had died in a tragic fall down the stairs in their home nearly 2 decades ago. There had been no witnesses, and her death had been ruled accidental. His second wife, Laura, had drowned in their private pool. Richard had claimed she suffered from a medical condition that may have led to her losing consciousness, and the case had been closed with no further investigation. Now, with Rebecca's sudden and unexplained death, a pattern was beginning to emerge. The circumstances of all 3 deaths were different, but the timing was eerily similar. Each woman had died within a few years of marrying Richard. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered another unsettling fact. Just 2 weeks before her death, Rebecca had withdrawn a significant amount of money from her bank account. The amount was far beyond her usual spending, suggesting she might have been preparing to leave. Had she discovered something about Richard? Had she planned to escape before it was too late? Interviews with Rebecca's close friends and family painted a troubling picture. While she had initially been excited about her marriage, her behavior had changed in the weeks leading up to her death. She had grown distant, avoiding calls and responding to messages with brief, vague replies. She had told her best friend, Megan, that she felt uneasy in the mansion and that something wasn't right. She never elaborated, but the fear in her voice had been clear. Another piece of the puzzle emerged when investigators examined security footage from the neighborhood. The Holloway mansion had a state-of-the-art security system, but on the night of Rebecca's death, the cameras had been turned off for several hours. However, footage from a nearby residence captured a shadowy figure entering the property just after sunset and leaving less than half an hour later. The footage was blurry, but it was clear that someone had been there. With a confirmed poisoning, a missing phone, a suspicious financial transaction, and now an unknown visitor to the property, the case was no longer just a matter of suspicion. It was a carefully orchestrated crime. But the question remained: who had killed Rebecca? And why? As detectives pushed forward with the investigation, new details emerged that made Rebecca's murder even more chilling. The mysterious figure caught on the security footage became a key focus. Though the image was too blurry to confirm an identity, the person's movements suggested familiarity with the property. Whoever had entered the Holloway mansion that evening knew exactly where they were going and had left without drawing attention. Richard Holloway continued to insist he had nothing to do with his wife's death, but inconsistencies in his story raised doubts. He claimed to have been away on business, but detectives found no official record of his travel during that time. A closer look at his financial records revealed something even more troubling. He had recently changed his will. Just 3 weeks before Rebecca's death, Richard had transferred all his assets to her. If she died, everything would go to his closest living relative, his nephew Daniel Holloway. Daniel was a 32-year-old businessman who had always been close to his uncle. Unlike Richard, Daniel had never built his own fortune. Instead, he relied on financial support from his wealthy family. When questioned, Daniel admitted he had concerns about Rebecca. He believed she had married Richard for money and had been trying to manipulate him. However, he denied any involvement in her death. Still, his name being the next in line for Richard's fortune made detectives suspicious. Then came another unexpected discovery. Rebecca had been meeting with a private investigator in the weeks leading up to her death. She had hired him to look into Richard's past. Her phone record showed frequent contact with the investigator, though her phone itself was still missing. When detectives tracked him down, he revealed the chilling details of his findings. Rebecca had been digging into the deaths of Richard's previous wives. She had found inconsistencies in their cases, patterns that suggested their deaths might not have been accidents. She was gathering evidence and, according to the investigator, had planned to confront Richard. The last time he spoke to her, she had been scared. She told him she thought someone was watching her. With this information, the case took a darker turn. If Rebecca had discovered something incriminating about Richard, she may have become a threat. The missing phone now seemed even more critical. Detectives widened their search, and their efforts finally paid off when they found the device discarded in a dumpster several blocks from the mansion. When they unlocked it, they uncovered messages between Rebecca and the private investigator detailing everything she had learned. She had even written a message, draft one she never sent, expressing fear that she might not live long enough to expose the truth. The evidence pointed in one clear direction. Rebecca had been silenced. But had Richard acted alone? Or had someone else been involved in ensuring she never got the chance to reveal what she knew? The final breakthrough in the investigation came when detectives began examining the roles of those closest to Richard Holloway. As the evidence mounted, one figure stood out, Mrs. Caldwell, the longtime housekeeper who had worked for Richard for over 2 decades. She was a quiet, elderly woman known for her loyalty to the Holloway family. Her presence in the mansion had been constant, and she had always been viewed as a trusted figure in Richard's life. However, her role in Rebecca's death was about to become clear in a way no one expected. Detectives had initially overlooked Mrs. Caldwell, focusing their attention on Richard and his nephew Daniel. But as they re-examined the evidence, they found subtle clues that pointed toward the housekeeper's involvement. She had been in the mansion the night of Rebecca's death, and her movements were not as innocent as they seemed. Investigators discovered that Mrs. Caldwell had been seen leaving the mansion late that evening, shortly after the time when the mysterious figure was captured on the security footage. As the investigation continued, another unexpected piece of the puzzle emerged. Mrs. Caldwell had been the one to disable the security system earlier that evening. She had accessed the mansion's controls, giving the killer time to enter without being seen. The fact that she had known how to bypass the security system suggested that she had been part of the plan from the start. Eventually, the pressure of the investigation grew too much for Mrs. Caldwell to handle. She broke down in a private interview with detectives, confessing to her involvement in Rebecca's murder. Her motive was chillingly simple. She believed she was protecting Richard. Miss Caldwell had been deeply loyal to him for years, almost to a fault. She had seen the way Rebecca had started to pull away from Richard, and she had heard whispers of the young bride's plan to leave him. In her confession, Mrs. Caldwell admitted that she had known Rebecca had hired the private investigator and was gathering evidence on Richard's past. She feared Rebecca would expose the truth about the deaths of Richard's previous wives, and she couldn't let that happen. In Mrs. Caldwell's eyes, Rebecca was a threat to everything Richard had worked for, and she had made the decision to silence her permanently. On the night of Rebecca's death, Mrs. Caldwell had entered the mansion under the guise of preparing for the couple's evening. She had laced Rebecca's wine with the same rare poison used in the deaths of Richard's previous wives, ensuring it was slow-acting so that Rebecca wouldn't feel its effects immediately. She had then waited until Rebecca was alone, allowing Richard to remain uninvolved in the actual crime. When Rebecca began feeling ill, Mrs. Caldwell took advantage of the situation, knowing it would be easy to manipulate the outcome. She ensured that the security cameras were turned off, allowing the killer to enter undetected. After Rebecca's death, Mrs. Caldwell staged the scene, breaking the pearl necklace and leaving the wine glass untouched, as if Rebecca had been the one to act carelessly. The truth was horrifying. Richard Holloway's past had caught up with him, and his darkest secrets were about to be exposed. But it was Mrs. Caldwell, not Richard, who had orchestrated Rebecca's death. The housekeeper was arrested, and despite her confession, the case continued to haunt the town for years. It served as a reminder of how blind loyalty could lead someone to commit unimaginable acts of violence, all in the name of protecting a man whose sins had caught up with him. Richard Holloway was eventually convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. Though he had not physically killed Rebecca, his manipulations, his wealth and his influence had set the stage for her tragic end. Mrs. Caldwell was sentenced to life in prison for her role in the crime. The story of Rebecca Holloway's short life and brutal death would echo through the town for generations, a cautionary tale about the danger of blind trust and the price of keeping secrets buried too long.